Hi out there, comics fans. I've got an interesting video for you today, a comics recommendation. This might be a new series, or it might just be this one video where I recommend comics to you that I think you should read, that I think should probably be read more, all things considered. And this is going to be an interesting video because the comic I'm recommending in this video isn't even necessarily one I agree with. But I was inspired to recommend this comic after I watched a video by a channel called The Almighty Lolly about Watchmen 2019 and what a bad adaptation of the comic it is. Now, I've said this many times, so I won't bother going into detail here, but Watchmen is hands down one of the worst comics ever made. It's not just the Snyder film or the 2019 show or Doomsday Clock or whatever that's bad. It's all bad. Watchmen as a franchise is morally bankrupt and rotten to the core, and only someone with like a very surface level understanding of comics would ever give Alan Moore credit as anything other than an untalented hack, because he is like one of the most blatant con men in the artistic circuit today. He gets away with things in comics that, like, if someone in movies got away with, it'd be like insane. But he's just able to get away with it in comics because nobody takes comics seriously as a medium, and I think that's sad. But anyway, this video kind of goes over the same type arguments, and it kind of makes a half-hearted attempt to maybe kind of poke fun a little bit at Alan Moore, but not like to the extent that I'm capable of. I'm capable of ridiculing and bringing Alan Moore's morale down to the level where, like, he basically has no respect for himself anymore. I'm just ruthless like that, you know. I'm an absolute beast out here in the comics game. But anyway, so this video makes some factual errors which I thought were worth pointing out. At one point, he says that, like, the Charlton Comics characters are DC characters, that the Question was a DC character.
Alan Moore based Rorschach off another DC character known as the Question, or Mr. A.
Another DC character.
I just have to ask, like, have we gotten to a point in history where we forget the existence of companies like Lev Gleason Comics, Fawcett Comics, Charlton Comics? Or are we literally reduced to the point where we think that DC and Marvel are the only comics that have ever existed? Like, I hear from people who are like, wow, Plastic Man is such a great DC character, and it's like, DC has bankrupted all its competition. It is literally just driven Fawcett and Charlton and Lev Gleason into the ground. Marvel did the same with Atlas and Harvey to an extent. You know, all these tertiary comics companies, which were necessary in the golden age of comics to keep like a healthy comics ecosystem going, you know, healthy competition, they've just been like completely erased from history, I guess, because the last I checked, the fucking Question and Blue Beetle are Charlton Comics characters, not DC characters. Maybe DC owns the intellectual property, but the Question and Blue Beetle were created by, like, Charlton Comics. So I think that's an important error to point out, because that's just, like, fucking stupid. I don't know how people forget that Charlton Comics existed. Again, this just goes to show how great Alan Moore is at erasing history. But the other error, which I think is the more egregious one, is that it says that, like, Steve Ditko, who is the creator of The Question and Spider-Man and Doctor Strange and also Mr. A, which is the subject of this video, was like far right, like alt-right, like, you know, like fucking, you know, QAnon or shit. And I think this is really embarrassing and just goes to show, like, how little people understand how, like, Steve Ditko actually was. So I think it's worth setting the record straight here. I don't like objectivism. I don't like Ayn Rand. The reason I don't like Ayn Rand is because her books are very clearly biased, because she came from an aristocratic Russian family, and the Soviet Union comes in, and she has to, you know, leave for America. Of course, she's going to have a negative opinion of communism. So I feel that objectivism, as a philosophy, is only designed, really, to attack communism. It also pretends to attack fascism to an equal extent, And in many ways, it's a centrist ideology. It's just like, wow, you know, communists are bad, fascists are bad, let's all just be selfish and dickish. But At the end of the day, the reason I disagree with Ayn Rand is because she is clearly biased. She's clearly coming from a place of not even really understanding America. Her books aren't bad just because they're objectivist. They're bad because the characters are stupid, the plots are stupid. She makes up these fake-ass American names that don't sound like American people at all. You know, it's corny bullshit. But on the other hand, Steve Ditko, from everything I've heard, you know, he didn't really have like a bias or anything. He just started reading Ayn Rand and based his comics off her ideas, which I think is fucking interesting. I'm going to say right out the gate, I wouldn't recommend you read Atlas Shrugged. I wouldn't recommend The Fountainhead. Pretty crap. I would recommend you read Mr. A though, and here's why. Mr. A is a fucking interesting character. That's the long and short of it. There's really no denying that. And I think to dismiss Mr. A as just like, ooh, he's an alt-right comic, you know, that's like fucking stupid. It's embarrassing, really. It's embarrassing to dismiss Steve Ditko's work as that. And I think it's sad that we've gotten to a point as a society where we literally, like, dismiss the comics made by the creator of fucking Spider-Man. It's probably the only reason Spider-Man's, like, the only Marvel character I even really give a shit about, because he wasn't created by Stan Lee. He was created by Steve Ditko. And let's be honest, Stan Lee just took all the credit for everything. And I can 100% Steve Ditko fucking leaving Marvel once he realizes what a commercialized slop heap it's about to become. But I will say this. Mr. A is a fucking interesting character. It's a fucking interesting comic to read. Even if you disagree with objectivism, even if, like, you're not an objectivist, you don't like Ayn Rand, even if you don't like Steve Ditko, you should read Mr. A because, my God, it's a fucking fascinating comic. Just how Steve Ditko is like, mind falls apart. And it's really sad, you know, because the world was clearly against him and his kind of, you know, principles and where he was coming from. I think it's a really sad and tragic story. He's one of the most tragic figures in comics, and I hold a great deal of respect for him because he was something that's incredibly rare to come by in comics nowadays. He was a figure with, like, actual principles who actually stood his ground, even if he was wrong, you know, even if objectivism is wrong. He stood his fucking ground. He wasn't a coward like Stan Lee, you know, who will just be in every fucking Disney movie, get all the pop culture line and shit. And, you know, Steve Ditko is like a cartoonist with integrity, which I can respect, even if I disagree with what he believed in. You know, I have no problems with, like, his comics. They're fucking interesting. And this video I saw also made the critical error of like, painting Alan Moore as, like, this anarcho-communist, you know? And, like, that's just fake. Like, I don't buy that anyone's a communist unless they're from an actual communist country, like the Soviet Union or Vietnam. Alan Moore's from Britain, so maybe he thinks, like, communism is getting free healthcare, but, you know, it's not. That's not what communism is. I don't buy for a second Alan Moore's a real communist. I find Alan Moore's gimmicks, like his big beard and all that shit, to be really cloying and insipid. You know, he's like fake crazy. He's like, oh, I talk to ghosts. And then meanwhile, you know, like Steve Ditko, the guy is actually crazy. And I respect that. I respect how fucking crazy Steve Ditko was. Steve Ditko is a kind of cartoonist who leaves no holds barred. He just goes straight the fuck in. Mr. A is a way more interesting character than any of the Watchmen. I stand by that. Because the Watchmen are all these fucking emo whiners. They just spend the whole comic complaining, whining, bickering. Mr. A is fucking interesting. Even if you don't agree that morality is objective, which I technically do as a secular humanist. I don't believe that, like, morality is ordained by God. All religious people are technically, like, kind of objectivist. But I do think there's behavior that can be morally condemned, like rape and murder. And I think if we have a world where, like, rape and murder are not, like, just objectively wrong, like, you just look at them and go, oh, you know, this shit's fucked, then, like, you know, what are we even doing at that point? I do think you can condemn certain behavior that is counterproductive to, like, human existence. Mr. A, his whole thing is, he's just, like, objectively good. And the comic dares to ask the really fucking interesting question, which is something that, like, you know, your average superhero comic won't, but that's because Mr. A is just, like, one fucking level, a cut above the rest, right? And is actually an interesting deconstruction of superheroes, you could even say, which is what everyone says about Watchmen. But Mr. A is way more effective at deconstruction of superheroes. What if there was a character who is literally just right in every circumstance and just like completely fucking right about everything and just like objectively good? Of course, this is impossible. This is an impossible ideal to reach because, you know, Steve Ditko can't like set moral, you know, limits or whatever. It's fucking interesting to think about that he thought he could. And you can learn way more from a comic written by an actual insane person like Steve Ditko than you can from a fake quirky ass insane person like Alan Moore. Is just like, oh, I talk to ghosts, yo. Answer me this, right? If something isn't objectively wrong, you know, if there's no such thing as an objectively like immoral behavior, then what DC does, you know, you can just dismiss it. You can just go, oh yeah, you know, they drove Charlton Comics into bankruptcy, bought up all their characters. They're like, hey, Alan Moore, come on in. You know, you can just make this shitty comic with a fake Blue Beetle and fake Question and shit, and just rename all the characters, and then erase Charlton Comics from history. I think that's objectively immoral. I think it's objectively immoral to discount the creative vision of people like Steve Ditko. You know, who work hard, just try and make fucking comics, and then, you know, the big conglomerate DC comes in, drives them into bankruptcy, steals all their shit. You know, I think that's fucked, and I think it's important to call that shit out. But I guess Alan Moore being, you know, a anarcho-communist, you know, ooh, I'm so quirky, you know, he wouldn't call that behavior out. He has no principles or morals. He has no standards. I'll say this, like, Mr. A is clearly the product of a deranged mind. It is not even, it's not right, you know, like there's contradictions and shit all over with Mr. A. But it asks questions that no other comic before or since has even remotely dared to ask, and even if those ideas are like kind of dumb when you get right down to it, like it's a well-drawn comic. It's way more interesting than any other superhero comic just because it is so philosophically based and like so interesting to pick apart, as it were. Not even necessarily to buy into, just to analyze. Way more fucking interesting than Watchmen. Yeah, I mean, watching the disintegration of the human mind, like what Steve Ditko obviously went through, is way more fucking interesting. Like, you know, Behold a Pale Horse. That shit's all insane, but I enjoy reading it because it's fucking interesting. It's way more interesting to read the words of insane people than to read the words of, like, sellouts, like Alan Moore or Stan Lee or whatever. And I think we're at a sad point where we don't give, you know, the fucking creator of Spider-Man credit. We dismiss him as, he was dumb, you know. But, like, we're giving that, like, Alan Moore all the props, and he just literally has a comic called fucking League of Extraordinary Bullshitters, where he just, like, takes all these public domain characters that he didn't invent, and it's just like, wow, they're mine now. He's like the fucking Disney of comics. And this is the guy we give, like, all the props and credit to. You know, I recommend Mr. A. Not just because I'm bitter about Watchmen, but because it's a fucking actually interesting comic that you should actually read. It's actually fucking interesting. Now, you'll probably disagree with it. I disagree with it, but it's interesting to imagine what a morally correct superhero would be like. And I think there should be more superheroes that are like, you know, kind of like based on a particular philosophy or way of looking at things. Like, there could be tons of potential there, but it's just not explored because all our great geniuses are like fucking Alan Moore. So that's sad. But yeah, I just figured I'd point that out. The Question is not a DC character, Charlton Comics character. And as far as I know, like, aside from being an objectivist, Steve Ditko is a pretty level-headed and based guy, and way cooler than Stan Lee or whatever. I do have a great deal of respect for Steve Ditko. It was crazy, and he was wrong in many, many regards, and, you know, I don't agree with him or Mr. A to that matter at all, but it's a fucking interesting comic to read. Like, you will not regret reading it. So yeah, I just figured it was worth saying and making those two very important corrections. The Question was not a fucking DC Comics character, Charlton Comics character, and Steve Ditko, as far as I can tell, was not like a frothing far-right bigot or anything. He was an objectivist, which is a school of philosophy I don't agree with in any capacity, but at the same time, he created Spider-Man, so I have a good deal of respect for him, and The Question and Mr. A. I actually really like The Question. The Question's fucking cool. Yeah, I think it's about time history set the record straight about Steve Ditko, like an actual pioneer of the comics medium, who clearly had a lot of interesting things to say. even if they were wrong. I respect him and his principles, and I think comics would be a lot better off today. Not necessarily if we listen to people like Steve Ditko, but definitely if we stopped listening to people like Alan Moore, because Alan Moore is one of the biggest hypocrites and like just total sellouts that any artistic medium has ever known. And the longer we prop this bozo up as like some kind of genius visionary or a fucking communist, which, you know, he definitely isn't. He's raked in so many millions of dollars by just stealing the fucking work of everyone else. And you can argue all day, is intellectual property a capitalist concept or not? I think theft is immoral. I think it's immoral to just like take other people's characters, like Steve Ditko's, and just go, oh, he's Rorschach now, and I'm gonna make fun of your ideas. I'm gonna roast you. Ooh, aren't I edgy? Ooh, I'm Alan Moore. Oh yeah, I'm Alan Moore. Oh damn. I think Alan Moore is embarrassing. And I think Mr. A is a comic that you should read. You should go read Mr. A. It's fucking interesting. It's not like a normal superhero comic. It's very, very far removed from a normal superhero comic. It's so fucking neat. It's like the next level of comics. You should read Mr. A. That's my comics recommendation. Okay. I'm so sick of these fake communists like Alan Moore and George Orwell, and for whatever reason, they're always British. I don't get what it is, but yeah, it's fucking annoying. Until next time, keep reading comics.